Not all stories are told in daylight. Here we tell you the stories they warn you not to repeat, and the ones they pray aren't true. Deep in the winter forests, the cold keeps its own secrets. Rangers are trained to track storms, to log wildlife, to measure the weight of snow. But some things can't be logged in a report. Some things follow you back, in silence, in smell, in voices you were never meant to hear. Tonight you'll hear 3 accounts from those who walked too far into the north and came back with memories they'll never set down in the official books. These are the Wendigo Ranger stories, told as they were remembered and never forgotten. Late winter is when the range goes quiet enough for you to hear your own pulse in the hood of your jacket. Tourism thins to nothing, access to roads glaze over, and every mile becomes math. A slope angle, aspect, wind loading, snowpack history. My winter patrol covered 3 avalanche paths above a decommissioned service road. Start zones cut into north-facing barrels. Runouts that fanned into the timber. We kept 2 buried training beacons out there. Little electronic lungs set to transmit at 457 kHz. The international standards, so new rangers and the SAR team could practice with transceivers, probes and shovels when the weather cooperated. The routine was comfort, morning forecast from the centre, moderate trending considerable on north and east aspects above the tree line. Wind slabs over a persistent weak layer of facets from December's cold snap. So I wrote down the numbers. Air temp, minus 12 degrees Celsius at 0700. Wind, northeast, 18, gusting 28. Sky, 1/8 overcast, no precip. I skinned up the road, ducked into the trees where a flagged corridor took over, and logged what the snow told me. Hand shears, a quick ECT, extended the column test, in a protective glade. The slab failed at 12 taps. Q2, planar, on a crossed facet, sandwich 8 inches down. It wasn't the kind of thing that kills a whole party, but it was the kind of thing that takes your feet out from under you on the wrong roll. By mid-afternoon, I'd confirmed both buried training beacons, Unit A and Unit B, were where we'd planted them in early January. One in the sheltered meadow near the old warming hut site. One higher, under a windroll in Bowl 2 runout. Batteries checked, housings dry, burial depths logged, 70 to 80 centimeters. I flipped my transceiver to search, walked a grid, got clean arrows and consistent distances to both. Good enough to write winter by. Back at the tiny cinderblock station, the evening settled into its particular kind of silence. The baseboard crackle, the low hum from the repeater rack, the smell of wet wool and instant coffee. The forecast printer spit out tomorrow's advisory. I thumbtacked it on the corkboard and let the world shrink to map squares, pencil lines, and the reassuring blink of the radio's green LED. I slept like the avalanche dogs, one ear up, the rest of me pretending. At 0143, the alert cut through the station like it had teeth. Not a phone, not a repeater. A thin, insistent chirp from the shelf where we keep specialist units on charge. Transceivers set to receive only overnight. One of them was picking up a live 457 signal. I sat up, heart 2 beats ahead of the rest of me, and stared across the room at the row of yellow and orange shells. A single LCD arrow blinked on the nearest unit. Distance, 38 meters. Direction, out there, through concrete, through weather, as if the snow beyond the wall had started talking. I checked the log. No team scheduled for night training, no missing persons call on the repeater. The station door was deadbolted, and boot tracks in the snow ended at my own. The world outside had the particular hush of a strong cold. Chalk it up to ghost signal, bad reflection off the tower, interference of metal shelves. I thumbed the power off, waited, and thumbed on. The arrow came back, steady. Distance 37 meters, it was moving. I pulled on pants, beacon harnessed, shell. I left a note on the blotter, took the lightest pack, probe, shovel, spare gloves, 1 Rico reflector in case a rescue bird decided to fly, which it wouldn't. Not at minus 12 and no moon. I flipped the transceiver to search, stepped into the dark, and the station door sighed shut like it was tired of my decisions. The air had that crystalline bite that makes your teeth feel like they're humming. Snow squeaked under boots, a cold squeak, the kind you hear at a certain number and know without looking. The arrow pointed into the trees. Distance, 34, 30, 28 meters. It felt like following a heartbeat you didn't own. Unit A lived in the meadow. Unit B downslope in the Bowl 2 runout. The arrow wasn't running to either line. It drifted oblique across contour towards a small roll where the forest breaks and the drainage braids. Not a place we buried training beacons, too many gullies, too much of a chance of water moving under the skin. The slope held its breath while my probe stitched the surface. 40 centimeters, 60, 90, hollow at a meter. Not weak snow, hollow, a particular give like a drum with a bad patch. I knelt, pulled gloves with my teeth and scooped a gloveful off. Under the top crust a void had formed. Air, not from sun crust sublimation or wind scour, but from the space where the snow should be. I pressed 2 fingers against the sidewall and felt the faintest current, as if the hill itself had drawn in a breath and was deciding whether to keep it. The transceiver now had 3.6 meters. No arrow. You're here territory. I built the pit like it mattered. Shovel slice, block out, toss in a clean fan. At 70 centimeters, my blade slid into nothing. Heat rose like a thought the snow couldn't quite hold on to. The void was the size of a sleeping bag, maybe bigger, and it didn't collapse when I undermined it. Vapor from my breath drifted sideways, pulled into the hole. The beacon arrow danced and gave me 2.5 meters, then 5.3, then 1.8 in an impossible sequence, like someone yanking the transmitter through space faster than my fingers. My probe dropped into the cavity with the softest tick. Nothing solid, nothing mechanical, just air where winter should be. I filled the pit back in, layer by layer, like closing a book. Sleep turned to the kind that watches you sleep. At 2:17 a.m. the shelf chirped again. Distance, 42 meters. Same bearing, then a kink, then 50 meters. It was travelling down slope in little lunges, stopping, lunging again. I mapped the points on the wall, top of grease pencil scratches zigzagging from the meadow line towards the Bowl 2 apron. No tracks under the moon, no wind to push snowmobile enough to fake it. Air still, sky black, range sleeping like stone. In the morning, I dug standardized pits, one in the meadow, one in the apron above the trees, shears that felt honest. Slab over facets on the shady side, stiffer than I'd like, but not a death sentence if you manage your angle and don't cut anything big. I verified Unit A and Unit B, solid, in their graves by my own hands weeks ago, alive and boring. That night, brought the chirp at 1:08 a.m, distance 61 meters. The track on the wall map traced a rational path, the kind a tired person takes in low light, aiming for the path of least resistance without knowing why. The arrow led me to a bend in the trees where summer runoff had undercut the bank and left a lip. I probed, dug, found another void. The sidewall bled a faint warmth. Smell in the air was cold, clean, with a thin coin taste under it that made the root of my tongue ache. I radioed the district in the morning, not as a ghost story, as a data point. We've got a Force 457 moving at night between the meadow and Bowl 2, not a training unit. Unknown source. Behavior looks like a transmitter being carried. Carried by what? Ops asked, halfway to a laugh that didn't land. Unknown, I said. Behavior is consistent with movements in starts and stops, holes in the pack each night. No sign in daylight. Weather's clean tomorrow, Ops said the way a man says, prove it or drop it. Take one more night, then pull the training beacons if you think they're compromised. Compromised. Good word. It covers everything and admits nothing. At 23:50, I was already in boots. I left a line on the blotter with coordinates and bearings. The arrow broke the shelf at 0017. Distance, 28 meters, then 23, then 19. It was closer to the station than any night prior. I stepped out under a low pressure of stars and fell in behind the tone. The beep of the transceiver in search is meant to soothe you. Soft pulse, consistent, encouraging, like the world wants to be found. The beeps stacked on top of each other now, out of phase, as if we're two units talking and neither would let the other finish a sentence. The arrow ran me along the shoulder of the drainage. I climbed through small firs too crowded to belong and broke into Bowl 2's apron, a flat white field under a slope that rises so cleanly it feels like a drawing teaching you the letter A. The beam of my headlamp failed to find any texture on the face above. Somewhere in that black, cornice it slept. I stood on the run-out, not the start zone, but the line of consequence runs through both. Distance, 12 meters. I probed. The probe rattled against space under the slab. I shoveled fast, clean, blocks over my shoulder, fan out where the apron wouldn't load. The pit wall polished under the blade. At 80 centimeters, my shovel hit air again. Heat licked my wrist like a breath out of a cave. The void extended laterally, bigger than the others. When I leaned, the walls cold ghosted into my jacket. No sound, no snow creep or settlement noise, no small talk from crystals adjusting to their new neighbours. Just a sense that something had been and was not now, like picking up a warm cup that should be cold. The transceiver read 0.7 meters, then 0.4, then 3.1 off my right hip, always just out of reach. I set the beacon on the lip of the pit so its arrow pointed where it wanted me, and for one breath it aimed dead center. Then it skittered sideways, arrow to the trees, 6.5, 8.2, whatever it was, it moved when I moved. My breath made a cloud that flattened strangely as it drifted towards the cavity, pulled by a pressure my skin didn't register. For a half second the pit exhaled, barely visible, a curl in the headlamp beam, warmer vapor rising from somewhere the shovel had not cut. I backfilled, slow, careful, quiet, the way a man puts a sleeping child back in a crib. The arrow led me along the apron to the far edge where Bowl 2 pinches into the trees. The slope above steeped into the kind of pitch that reads 38 to 42 degrees even if you never carried an inclinometer. The face had loaded from 2 days of east wind. A chalky wind slab sat polished under the headlamp, tight and ready to be told the reason. Distance, 10 meters. 9.5. 9. The tone turned into a near constant whine that lives somewhere behind the ears. The beacon jittered between 9.0 and 3.0 like it knew what I wanted and wanted to refuse it. I knelt and brushed the surface with the glove. No crackling, no hollow thrum. A good skin of stiff slab over whatever December had left me. The probe sank through 60 centimeters of chalk and then 20 of older, softer snow. Then halted on something that was not ground. Not tree, not rock, not wood. A firmness like hide pulled over the framework, with the give of stretched fabric. Every nerve in my forearm told me not to push. I pushed. The probe went through and found nothing. The resistance had been a skin over cavity, air again, bigger room this time. The slope above me made one small settling sound, the kind you hear before the big sound, a tactile whomp punched through my knees into the earth. The slab under me didn't go. The slab to my left settled an inch, then decided to remember how to be still. I held breath I didn't need to hold. The beacon on my chest chirped and then screamed, not on search, but on send. My unit had switched itself. The LCD threw my own ID code back at me. 3 digits I knew from annual checks, rolling across the screen as if the device were inside a test jig, not attached to the front of my body. I stared at the send icon, thumb on the mode button, and it didn't care. It broadcast again, over me, through me. Something in the buried dark using my harness as a mouth. The tone that goes out in a rescue, ping, pause, ping, left my chest without my permission and came back from the hill in perfect rhythm. The hill had learned a word and was saying it. Down slope, snow cracked in a thin Z. A piece of slab shuffled, cut loose, ran 10 feet and stopped, unhappy. Not the big one, a test, an arm flex. Distance on the receiver flashed 2.1, then 1.9, then 2.5 to my right as if something sidled beneath me, tasting where the weight was. I stepped back into the apron's safer angle, eyes blind to everything but the LCD and the face of snow above that had decided to be a face. My thigh hit the small fur behind me and shook down a rattle of ice from its needles. The ice hit the surface and didn't bounce, it sank, not into powder, but into pores where slabs shouldn't breathe. The hill took it. Base, I said, finally remembering radios were a thing. Ranger 4 at Bowl 2 apron. possible, false 457 in motion under slab, slope primed. The repeater clipped the first 2 words and fed me my own voice back half a second late. Not mimicry, latency, electronics, but with the other tone chiming through bone and snow and cartilage, it all braided into one rope that I did not want to hold. I eased backwards 2 more steps, then turned and walked out, head down, careful, pretending it's what I meant to do. The beacon stopped transmitting from my chest. The icon flipped itself to search by itself as if nothing had happened. Distance numbers went blank for a heartbeat, then returned with an arrow pointing upslope and 7.3 meters. Whatever had borrowed the frequency let go. Morning was clean, blue, sterilized new gloves. I flagged the apron with bamboo and a high-vis streamer, wrote no travel, instability, in block letters that looked too cheerful, and filed a hazard report with coordinates, slope angle, aspect, and a narrative that used words like artifact, interference, and transient anomaly because there aren't boxes for anything else. Ops grounded training at Bowl 2 and sent me with a partner to pull Unit B. We dug it up from its grave at 78 centimeters exactly where my note said, wrapped in its dry bag like a patient in a vacuum pack. The battery test chirped green, housing clean. Nothing to tell you it ever spoke at night. Back at the station, I put my own transceiver on the bench and plugged it into the diagnostic cradle. The data dump printed a strip of ghosts, timestamped logs of sends and receives from the last 72 hours. At 0031, send, my ID, duration 3 seconds. At 0002, send, my ID, duration 4 seconds, a cluster of them, neatly spaced, right when I stood on the apron with my thumb on the button and didn't press. Ops looked at the strip, looked at me, looked at the strip again like it could be talked into truth. Could be a stuck switch, he said. Could be. We sent my unit to the shop. I took a loaner that smelled like the last man to wear it didn't believe sweat was a thing that evaporates. The night we pulled Unit B, the shelf chirped again, distance 112 meters. Bearing not to the bowls, but to the road. The ploughed, public, dull ribbon that winds through the valley and spits tourists into town with diners and a hardware store that sells more pellets than day was January. I went far out enough to know that I didn't want to go farther. The arrow pointed down the corridor. I stood under the stairs, listened to the small sounds a forest makes when it pretends it never made other sounds, and turned back. The diagnostics log in the morning didn't clear anything up. A single send entry at 3:12. My ID, duration, 1 second. While my new loaner unit sat powered off on the hook by the door, Ops circled it in red and wrote cradle glitch in the margin. A week later, patrol from the next district over called to ask if we'd been running any after-hours training uptown. Their avalanche beacon checker at the roadside turnout had chirped for 20 minutes just after 2 a.m. Might be a pocket of weird reflections, I said, and tried to keep my voice in the neighborhood of average. We replaced both training units with fresh beacons and buried them in new holes far from Bowl 2. We stripped the old cache down to wood and left the meadow to its rabbit tracks of wind. When the forecast went high with a storm cycle, the bowls cleaned themselves in one afternoon, broad crowns, neat debris fans. All the energy spilled out like a body after a scream. We waited out the cycle and then skinned back up to assess. The apron where my probe found the knocked ground felt heavier underfoot, like a man who stands where he saw his house burn. I've kept the diagnostic strip in my inside pocket. Ink on thin paper. 3 black rectangles labelled with my code where no rectangle should be. If you look fast, it's electronics. If you look slow, it's a map of a mouth forming a word. We can call it interference, groundbouts, multi-path reflections of ice lenses, a stack of rational things. We can call it a trick of a tired brain late at night in a winter that went on too long. We can call it a story we tell each other so that we keep going back out under the headlamps to where the slab tightens and breath holds. But the snow remembers shapes we don't. The range keeps the paths it likes. Something learned a signal we teach to rookies and rescue dogs and people who don't want to die under white. It learned enough to move with it. It learned enough to borrow my mouth for a minute. I still carry a transceiver any time I step off a road in winter. On search, it's a compass. On send, it's a confession. When it chirps now, even on a benign training day, I feel the sound in the bones of my wrist the way you would feel a word you don't understand and will never learn to pronounce. If you hear a beacon at night where none should be. You can follow it if you can't help yourself. You can dig a clean pit, make tidy blocks, and put them back like you never touched the page. Or you can do what the old timers do and let the hill keep its noises. I file the forms and drink coffee and check the batteries. I tell the lonely unit goodnight out loud sometimes because routine keeps the shape of a day intact. And when the shelf chirps in the small hours and arrow points away from the bowls towards the highways and radios and diners and houses with pellet stoves that tick themselves cool after midnight, I let myself picture the runouts that don't end at timber. The sound gets where it's going, one way or another. I got sent north on a call nobody else wanted. Late January, cold enough that spit would freeze before it hit the ground. They told me it was routine, a check on the old patrol cabin up along Ridgeway Road. Hunters had reported lights out there 2 nights in a row and nobody was supposed to be using it. Headquarters figured maybe squatters, maybe kids, maybe nothing. The road isn't even really a road anymore, just a snow-choked line through black spruce and jack pine, rutted and drifted, ploughed maybe once a year if that. My truck could only make it so far before the drifts ate the tyres. I parked, locked the rifle in the rack and strapped on snowshoes for the last 3 miles in. The forest was dead quiet, but not peaceful quiet. Almost wrong. You get used to the normal sounds, chickadees buzzing, squirrels skittering, branches creaking under snow, but this wasn't the same. This was heavy. Like every living thing had packed up and gone. Half a mile from a cabin, I found tracks cutting across the road. Not moose, not wolf, longer. The gait was strange, dragging almost, with deep punctures where weight pressed down. At first I thought snowshoes, but no snowshoe leaves holes that narrow or strides that wide. I crouched down, glove against the edge of one, and the print swallowed half of my arm. I told myself it was ice melt, distortion, anything. You start telling yourself stories before the real facts start getting into play. By the time I reached the cabin ridge, the sun was bleeding out fast. Up here, twilight doesn't last long. You get a minute of bruised purple sky and then it's just black. The patrol cabin sat hunched against a strand of spruce, tin chimney bent, shutters iced over. From the tree line I could already see the porch. Snow was scattered like something heavy had paced back and forth for hours. I stopped and keyed my radio. Patrol 7 to base, at sight, signs of disturbance, going in. Static answered. I tried again, same thing, no voice, no acknowledgement, just static, thick as wool. That's when the smell hit, copper, sharp, like a coin rubbed between your teeth. It burned in the back of my throat and the air felt heavier for it. I adjusted the strap on the rifle, crunched across the snow and climbed the porch. The door latch was bent, not broken, bent upward like something too strong and too clumsy had tried to figure it out. I drew a breath, pushed the door and stepped inside. The cabin smelled like damp wood and mouse droppings. Normal enough, but laid under it was the same copper tang, faint but sharp enough to sting the sinuses. The lantern by the door was gone, and the logbook that should have been on the table was lying open on the floor, pages bent like something had rifled through them with wet hands. I swung the door shut and tested the latch. It wouldn't hold. Metal walked too far. I shoved a chair under the handle instead. An old trick, but good enough for raccoons, maybe people. Definitely wouldn't stop anything that could bend metal barehanded. I swept the room with my flashlight. Bunks against the wall. Stove still cold. Wood stacked neatly in the corner. Everything ordinary but off, like the place had been staged to look empty after someone left in a hurry. I radioed again. Patrol 7 to base, inside cabin, logbook disturbed, no contact. The static hissed back and then another voice broke through. It wasn't dispatched, it wasn't anyone I knew, just my own call sign, repeated in a flat, broken tone.
Patrol 7, Patrol 7, Patrol 7.
The voice had no weight behind it, no breath, like a tape loop stuck on repeat. My thumb froze on the transmit key. I didn't answer. The voice kept going, dragging my number out longer each time. Finally it stopped, cut clean like a switch flipped. The static roared back and then silence. I killed the radio and set it down. My skin crawled. The stove had a few unburned logs inside, like someone had stacked them but never struck a match. I lit it, but the heat wasn't comfort, it was survival. With snow deep as it was, no way I'd make it back to the truck before dark. I'd hold up here, ride the night, and head back at first light. That was the plan. I unrolled the bedroll on the top bunk and sat listening. Every creak of the timbers carried like a shout. The storm shutters rattled once, twice, and then stilled. And then something brushed against the outside wall. Not claws, not a branch. Dragging weight, slow, deliberate. It started at one corner of the cabin and scraped along the planks, moving towards the door. When it stopped, the chair under the latch trembled. I didn't breathe. The smell of copper thickened, heavy now, pressing against the heat of the stove. My mouth tasted like blood, though I hadn't bitten my tongue. And then, from the porch came a voice. Flat, too low, stretched wrong. But it was mine. Patrol 7, open up. You left the stove cold. The fire cracked hard in the stove, throwing sparks against the iron. I gripped the rifle stock and stared at the door. The voice outside felt quiet, but the weight of the porch didn't move. I could hear it, heavy breaths pressing through the wood too close to be wind. The chair under the latch nudged forward half an inch. The door groaned. I raised the rifle, heart hammering, breath fogging in the cold air. Every instinct screamed at me not to fire, not yet, not until I had no choice, because if it was a man, even a deranged one, a shot would bring every badge in the district down on my head. But the thing that spoke in my voice wasn't a man. The doorframe shuddered, wood fibers popped like bones under strain. Then came a sound that didn't belong to any human throat. A low hiss, like meat searing on iron. The smell of copper flared, sharp enough to make me gag. Then it pushed. The chair toppled sideways and the door swung inwards against the wall. Snow gusted through and something ducked inside. It wasn't fast, it didn't need to be. Tall, too tall, shoulders hunched, arms hanging past its knees. The head cocked to one side as if the doorway was an insult to its height. What skin showed in the lamplight was pale and cracked, stretched so tight over the skull it looked ready to split. The eyes were worse, pits blacker than dark outside, fixed on me, but not blinking. It smiled. Lips cracked, teeth too many, too sharp. My own breath hitched in my chest, and the sound made its head tilt farther, like it was learning me. It stepped forward. The weight of it made the floor sag. I fired. The first shot hit its chest dead center. The crack thundered through the cabin and the recoil slammed my shoulder. But the thing barely staggered. It only hissed louder, steam rising from the wound like snow hitting a stove. I cycled the bolt, fired again. The second shot punched its shoulder. The Wendigo flinched, but the movement wasn't pain, it was anger. It came fast then, not graceful, not human, a lunge, a sweep of its arm that sent the bunk shattering against the wall. The rifle tore from my grip. I stumbled back, heat of the stove on my side. And it was there, face close enough that I smelled rot under the copper. Its mouth opened. My voice spoke out again. Patrol 7, open the door. I grabbed the stove kettle, boiling hard, and threw it. The steam burst between us, hissing against its skin. It screamed. Not in my voice, not in any human's, but a sound thin and sharp enough to split the air. It recoiled, slammed back against the wall, arms dragging deep gouges down the timber. The window shattered behind it, snow blasting in, and then it was gone. Out into the storm, a blur of pale limbs and vanishing into the tree line. The copper smell lingered like smoke. The cabin was wrecked, bunk crushed, glass everywhere, snow blowing in hard through the broken window. My rifle lay bent near the door like it had been twisted in a vice. The chair that braced the iron latch was splintered. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. I fed the stove all night, staring at the dark hole where the window had been, waiting for the thing to come back. Every gust of wind carried that copper stink. Every snap in the trees sounded like footsteps. But it didn't return. Not that night. At first light, I packed. I didn't sweep. I didn't log the time. I just slugged what I could and started south on snowshoes, legs trembling with every step. The woods was silent. No birds, no tracks but mine. The quiet pressed in, thicker with each mile. I stopped once to catch my breath and looked back. The ridge was just black timber against a pale sky. Nothing moved. By dusk, I saw the glint of a ploughed highway through the trees. Relief hit hard enough I had to kneel in the snow. I wanted to run, but forced myself to walk steadily until I reached the truck. Climbed in, locked the doors, let the heater run until my hands stopped shaking. When I finally rolled into a Ranger HQ that night, I must have looked like hell. Snow still clinging to my gear, eyes red, voice ragged. I barely got through the door and one of the guys at the desk frowned. "You already checked in?" he said. "What?" I muttered, staring at him. "A couple of hours ago. Radio call. He said the cabin was clear, no issues. Told us not to send backup." I hadn't touched the radio since the static on the ridge. The room tilted under me. My throat went dry. All I could manage was a whisper. That wasn't me. When you're in search and rescue, you learn that a mission in the dead of winter is always a race against time. But this mission, this was different. I was part of a team sent to save a man's life, but the mission ended up costing us our own. We were prepared for the blizzard, for the treacherous terrain, and for all the usual dangers of the mountain. What we weren't prepared for was a thing hunting us in the snow, and the dawning horror that the real monster was already inside our camp. The story you're about to hear is my own. You won't find any official records for my team, no public reports of what happened to us near a place called Widow's Peak. They buried it. There's only one story I have left to tell, and it begins, as they often do, with a distress call. The call came in just after dawn. A lone climber, we'll call him Julian, had fired off his personal locator beacon. He was high up on a notoriously nasty ridge known to the locals as Widow's Peak. Julian was an experienced mountaineer, but he was way off route, and a once-in-a-decade storm front was rolling in faster than anyone expected. The mission was straightforward, but perilous. Get in, find Julian, and get out before the storm slammed that door shut. They sent in the best team we had. Our leader, Alistair, a 20-year SAR veteran with a calm that defied the elements. His second-in-command, Carla, was our medic, wickedly sharp and even sharper in the field. Ben was the youngest, a powerhouse who could haul gear for hours without complaint. Let's just call me David. I was a tech and comms guy, the lifeline to the outside world. We set out with a practiced clockwork efficiency, establishing a base camp at the tree line, our safe zone for the final ascent. The air was cold, but the sky was clear. There was urgency, but it felt routine. It felt like a textbook operation. The plan was simple: make contact, get him stable, and guide him down. I remember Alice's voice steady over the radio I was monitoring. Team is ops normal, proceeding to last known coordinates. Weather holding for now. Over. But up on the mountain, the weather doesn't play by the rules, and as we climbed higher, leaving the safety of the trees behind, the wind began to pick up a low, mournful howl. The storm didn't just roll in, it hit us like a physical blow. One moment we could see the jagged silhouette of Widow's Peak against the grey sky, the next our entire world dissolved into a blinding, furious white. The temperature plummeted, the wind screamed, tearing at our gear, trying to rip us right off the mountainside. In an instant, the mission changed. This wasn't a rescue anymore, this was survival. Alice's voice, now strained, crackled over my headset as it lost its battle with the storm. Repeat, we're in total whiteout, visibility is 0, setting up emergency shelter. Then just static. I tried everything, but they were gone, we were cut off. Forced to dig in, we threw up our specialized storm tent, a tiny dome of nylon that became our whole world. Inside, the four of us huddled together, the roar of the blizzard a constant deafening noise. Hours bled into a day, then a second. We were completely trapped. Our job was to conserve heat and energy, waiting for a break that wouldn't come. The professional calm we all shared started to fray, worn thin by the relentless cold and the crushing confinement. It was on the third day that the real horror began. The storm hadn't let up, but a new sound had joined the chaos. It was faint at first, almost nothing. so quiet you could barely distinguish it from the wind. It sounded like a voice, a man calling for help. "Did you guys hear that?" Ben asked, his eyes wide. I shook my head, fiddling with my now useless radio gear. "It's the wind, Ben. It's playing tricks on you. Your brain's just trying to make sense of the noise." But then Carla heard it too. "It sounds like Julian." We all strained to listen, the hope of finding him warring with the terrifying impossibility of it. Nobody could survive out in that storm. The voice would come and go, a phantom cry that seemed to be right outside our tent 1 second and miles away the next. The psychological damage was immediate. Was Croft still alive, taunting us from inside the blizzard? Or were our minds, addled by isolation, finally turning on us? The next day I found something. During a brief quiet moment in the wind, I've been trying to get a signal, cycling through frequencies. I picked up a garbled transmission on a closed channel. It wasn't from base, it was a loop, repeating over and over. A man's voice, whispering. I couldn't make out the words, but in between them was another sound. A wet, rhythmic chewing. Paranoia wasn't just creeping in anymore, it was sitting right there with us. We grew quiet, each lost in our own dark thoughts. Ben became withdrawn. He'd just stare at the walls of the tent for hours, muttering. He started complaining about annoying hunger, a deep, aching emptiness that our rations just couldn't seem to touch. On the 5th day, we got a window. The storm broke just long enough for visibility to clear it to a few dozen feet, and Alistair made the call. We had to move. We had to try and find Julian's original camp. We found it less than a quarter mile away. The tent was shredded, but not by wind. It looked like it had been torn apart from the inside. Scattered among the frozen supplies, Carla found Croft's journal. The last few entries charted a complete descent into madness. He wrote about being trapped by the same storm. He wrote about hunger. Not normal hunger, but insatiable, all-consuming need. He described seeing a tall, gaunt figure moving through the whiteout, a shape of shadow and ice with burning eyes. But the final terrifying entry was a single scrawled sentence Carla read aloud, her voice trembling. "The hunger is a gift. I am no longer cold. I am no longer alone." Right beneath it, he'd drawn a strange spiral symbol in what looked like frozen blood. As she read the words, Ben stumbled back. He was staring at the symbol with a look of pure, horrifying recognition. He'd been scratching that exact same symbol into the frost on the outside of our own tent. The real horror wasn't that some monster was hunting us in the snow. It was that Julian had become one, and the infection of his madness, or whatever it was, had already found its way into our camp. When we got back to our camp, the air wasn't just tense, it was toxic. The trust that holds a team together was gone, replaced by a pure, raw fear. Every time Ben even glanced at us, I flinched. His physical state was deteriorating fast. His skin was ghostly pale. His eyes were sunken and he shivered constantly, yet he kept complaining that he was hot, like he was burning up from the inside. The breaking point came that night. I was trying, one last time, to get the radio working, when Ben lunged at me. It was a feral attack, his eyes wild, a low growl tearing from his throat. "It's so hungry," he snarled. The world's barely human. "It needs to eat." Alistair and Carla tackled him in a desperate, chaotic struggle in our tiny space. Ben fought back with his unnatural strength, throwing me against the wall of the tent. He wasn't our teammate anymore, he was a cornered animal. We finally managed to get him restrained, tying his hands up with climbing rope. Ben lay on the floor of the tent, his body convulsing. He thrashed and sobbed, his voice shifting horribly. 1 minute he was begging for help in his own voice, the next he was whispering in that low, guttural tone from my radio loop. He spoke of the cold, of an endless hunger, of being transformed. "It's inside me," he screamed, eyes rolling back in his head. "It's making me change." The final showdown wasn't with a monster. It was right here, inside the tent. It was Alistair, Carla, and me, armed with sedatives and rope, fighting for our friend's soul. As Carla finally managed to administer a heavy sedative, Ben's struggles stopped. He fell into a twitching, feverish sleep. Terrifying silence fell, broken only by the howl of the wind and the ragged, panicky breaths of the three of us who were left. That was the last time I saw my team together. The official report, if you could call it that, is frustratingly simple. When the storm finally broke about a week later, search parties were sent out. They found Julian's shredded tent, they found our abandoned base camp at the tree line, but of Alistair, Carla and Ben they found nothing. No bodies, no gear, no shelter. As if 3 highly trained professionals had simply been erased from the face of the mountain. The final piece of the story comes from my own damaged recorder, the one I had on me when I ran. It took months to recover anything from it. Most of it is static, but right at the very end, you can just make out Alice's voice, no longer calm, but high-pitched with terror.
It's not Ben. It's not. Oh, God, Carla, don't let it in.
Then there's a scream, unmistakably Carla's, then the sound of tearing fabric and a final inhuman growl that's deep and guttural and seems to vibrate with a hunger that has, at least, now been fed. And then, silence. What happened to the rest of the rescue team on Widow's Peak? Did they just succumb to the elements, their minds broken by the cold? Or did we run into something older, something born from the hunger and desperation that mountain demands tribute? Maybe the true horror isn't in what we found on that mountain, but in what we became. I'm telling you this as a warning. When you stare into the whiteout long enough, you might not like what you see staring back. If you stayed with us through the night, thank you for listening. Stories like these are more than warnings. They're reminders of what waits beyond the gates, past the comfort of lights, out where winter still owns the land. And if you enjoyed this telling, consider subscribing for more nights like these. And remember, the forest keeps its own kind of truth. Until next time, may your nights stay boring.